Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Lambert, and on behalf of Atrium Innovations, I welcome you to this evening's webinar on whole body health, Genestra HMF probiotic innovations, and evidence for GI health, immune health, and the aging brain, presented by Dr. Nigel Plummer. You've joined the webinar in listen-only mode, which means that you're muted. The default audio option is voice over IP. However, you can also join using the provided phone number, access code, and PIN. Please note that this number is long distance and charges will apply. We have incorporated an interesting feature for 2021 webinars. A few polls will be launched during the webinar this evening. Questions should be submitted via the questions pane and will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Now, before passing the call to Dr. Plummer, I'd like to share a few promo codes with you and encourage you to take advantage of the discount they provide. They can be used once before December 10th, and they qualify for free shipping. So in Canada, the promo code is HMF WEB 2021, and it provides a 10% discount on the shelf-stable versions of HMF Intensive, HMF IBS Relief, HMF Forte, HMF Immune, HMF Women's Daily, and HMF Multi-Strain, so all shelf-stable versions of those formulations, as well as HMF Vaginal Health and HMF Baby Drops. And in the US, the promo code HMF Web 2021U provides a 10% discount on the shelf-stable versions of HMF Intensive, HMF Forte, HMF Immune, HMF Women's Daily, and HMF Multi-Strain. So to reiterate, all the shelf-stable versions of those formulations. I'd also like to highlight a few aspects of our fall 2021 educational program so you can include them in your schedule. On November 3rd, Dr. Peter Bongiorno will present on the role of histamines in mental health. And on November 17th, Dr. Felice Gersh will present on time-restricted eating and targeted supplementation, a new approach to weight loss. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Plummer. Dr. Plummer earned his doctorate in microbial physiology from the University of Surrey, UK, and began his career at Pfizer working on the development and manufacture of antibiotics. Dr. Plummer's commitment to research and development has continued in the academic sphere, and his research group has now published more than 100 original scientific papers on the human microbiome, probiotics, and omega-3 fatty acids. In addition, they've published 22 full human randomized controlled trials on the impact of probiotics on many aspects of human physiology and pathology. Dr. Plummer's investment in research and development continues to break new ground. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nigel Plummer. Dr. Plummer?
Thank you, Diane, and welcome everybody. Good evening. I think it's about 8 o'clock over there, or 5 o'clock if you're on the West Coast. It's 1 a.m. in the UK, so but welcome. Today is going to be a slightly different seminar, or webinar even, compared to ones that I normally give. Normally, if you've heard me speak previously, the webinars are very sciencey, very data driven, if you like, and I talk about science and the research which we do. And I'll be talking about some of that today. But as well as that, what I'm going to be talking about is a different aspect of the science and technology which we use, and it's in how we develop and manufacture probiotics. Because as well as doing the research, the group that I have here, we obviously manufacture all of the HMF products, and we isolate our own strains and do our own development. And so that whole process is integrated, and the research that we do is part and parcel of that integrated approach. And I never really speak about the other side, which is the technology that we have in terms of isolation of strains, screening of strains, and manufacture of the different strains and manufacture of the products. But the reason that I'm going to go through that tonight is because over the past 10 years, there's been a sea change in terms of how the technology that we have in terms of producing probiotics. And the biggest aspect of that sea change has been the ability to now produce probiotics that are shelf stable at ambient conditions. So I'll be going through that and how that's developed and why that's developed and why the HMF products are now available in both ambient forms and in refrigerated forms. And then we'll also be speaking about some of the range of HMF products and looking at how we differentiate them, when to use them, how to use them, because there are quite a lot of products within the range now. So a slightly different approach. So let's get onto it straight away. So, okay, that's just bits and pieces. I've been told that on this one that you have to use your promo codes, and they're valid until, obviously, from what I can see here, they're valid until December the 10th, 2021. So be sure to use your promo codes, and obviously it looks like you get 10% off the various products both in Canada and in the USA. Okay, let's just start off. Probiotics. Probiotics are different to every other supplement, and they're different in a very obvious way. But we tend to be a bit blasé about it, in that probiotics are the only supplements that are living supplements, and we tend to forget, as I say, that they are live. And if they're live, then they're prone to actually dying, and that's what often they will do. They're live, but they're in a state of suspended animation because they've been freeze dried. But over the past 50 years or so, one of the real banes of probiotic commercialization has been that probiotic products are notoriously prone to instability and effectively die off. So that you can have, let's say, 10 billion cells at time of manufacture, and then within a very short period of time, particularly at ambient conditions, that can decrease by maybe 90%. And so prior to the last 10 years, it's been impossible for that reason, because we didn't understand the elements that controlled this die-off and stability or instability at ambient conditions. It meant that virtually all products had to be stored under refrigerated conditions. So, and this instability that we see is increased if we add other components to a probiotic. So if you're adding vitamins or minerals, botanicals, once you add these to probiotic products, irrespective, then the probiotics will become even more or even less stable than they were without these nutrients being added to them. And that's why even now probiotic products tend to be probiotics only. You don't see very many probiotics that have multivitamins added to them, that have a number of botanicals added to them. And the reason being is that unless you have special techniques, the addition of those components to probiotics, particularly if they're in high potency probiotics, it will destabilize them. So, as I say, prior to the last 10 years or so, particularly in the last 5 years, the only way that we knew of minimizing this die-off and enabling probiotics to reach label claim over, let's say, an 18 to 24 month period was to keep them in a fridge. And that is what, up until, let's say, the last 5 years, that's what's been done. There was another way, though, of almost getting around the idea that the problems associated with stability or instability of probiotics at ambient temperatures, and that was by labeling the label claim, if you like, at time of manufacture. And that is still a label designation and a type of labeling that is used today. It's used in the USA quite frequently. It's not allowed within Europe, and I think it's frowned upon, maybe not even allowed in the Canadian marketplace either. Let me just show you what I mean by that and labeling of this type. This is two products here. So on your left-hand side here, you can see that the product, this is a product that's on sale in the USA currently. And you can see that on the labeling there, it says 100 billion CFUs. And then it's got a little asterisk. And down on the second sort of little sentence down there, you can see the asterisk there. And it says contains a minimum of 100 billion live cultures at time of manufacture. And what that is effectively is a real cop-out, because what it means is that at the time, actually at the time of manufacture of that product, it probably contained 100 billion cells, but it gives you no idea of how many of those survive through the shelf life. And the shelf life might be 18 months. And at the end of that 18-month period, there isn't anything there to say that there is anything left. It might be completely dead. What is almost certainly true is that at the end of the shelf life, which may be 18 months, whatever the shelf life is actually stated there, because this is an ambient product, that it will be significantly less than 100 billion. And then there's another type of labeling, which is on the second, the middle and the right-hand panes here that you can see. So this is a product here, which is a 15 billion CFU product. You can see it says there 15 billion CFUs. Oh, I should have used my pointer. That's the disclaimer there. Contains 100 billion live cultures at time of manufacture. On this product here, it's 15 billion CFUs. This is the bottom of the pack here. You can see here that there's the double asterisk. There's the double asterisk there. Contains a minimum of 15 billion active cultures at manufacture and provides an effective level until the best by date. Now, again, that doesn't mean anything. What does the effective level mean? It could be, is that 10% of 15 billion? Is it 1.5 billion? Is it 3 billion? It doesn't actually state it. So it's a very unsatisfactory way of actually labeling probiotics. As I say, there are still labeling like this occurring in the USA. It's not allowed within Europe, and I'm not sure. I don't think it's allowed within Canada either. But just to let you know, that's one way that companies have used to kind of get around the issue. So over the last 10 years, us over here, as if you like, part of the Atrium Group, we've developed we've learned a lot and developed a lot of techniques in terms of optimizing this preservation and stability of probiotic products. But to understand how we've done that and to understand the entire process, it's best if you understand a little bit about the entire manufacturing process. As you know, when we isolate from humans, so we take healthy humans, and then there is a process of purification and identification. So the purification, that's on the right-hand side there, as you're looking at it. What we do is we basically take, let's say, the fecal sample, and what we call plate it out. So we plate it out, and all of the various bacteria, then what we do is plate it out so that each cell produces a single colony. And then we basically take that single colony and we produce a Petri dish like I'm showing on the screen there, where that single cell has produced a single colony. We then take that single colony and we then put that onto another Petri dish, spread it out, and we produce what's called a pure culture from that single cell. So we've got then a pure culture, and then we can, once we've got that, so it's a single, it's a pure culture effectively produced from a single cell, from a single bacterial cell from that sample, and then we can go on to identify it. And that's what we do on the left-hand side there. And there are three techniques that we use. We use basically traditional microbiology to take the identification down to what we call the genus level. That will tell us whether it's a lactobacillus, for instance, or a bifidobacterium. Those are called the genera. And then we use another technique, which is a genetic technique, which is called 16S RNA gene sequencing, and that takes us down to the species level. So it will take us down, for instance, to Lactobacillus acidophilus or Lactobacillus casei or paracasei, and so on and so forth. And then we use a more specific technique of whole genome sequencing to identify the organism down to a strain level. So we can say it is our strain, Lactobacillus acidophilus col21 strain, which is different to Lactobacillus acidophilus something else strain. And we have a whole genome sequence to verify that. So that's the purification and identification. Once we've got all that, then we then screen our isolates for their probiotic characteristics. And what we're clearly looking for here is strains that have the highest level of what we see as desirable probiotic characteristics. So some of the things that they need to be able to do is survive gastric acid, and they need to be able to survive bile. We need to look at whether they've got colonization potential, so whether they can attach to epithelial cells in the gut, whether they can survive within mucus, for instance. Then we look at their immunological potential. Can they drive immune tolerance? Do they sway the immune system towards Th1 or Th2? We look at those sorts of characteristics, and then we look at whether they're sensitive to antibiotics and some other characteristics as well, particularly in, say, vaginal strains, where we look at whether they can produce peroxide, because that gives them a competitive advantage in the vaginal canal. And then we have our candidate, if everything has gone through that and everything's fine, we have our candidate commercial strain, and then we start our production assessment. And if it goes through that production assessment fine, then this is how we actually produce what we call our mother strain. So if we think this is one that we're going to tentatively put into production, we then generate what we call a mother culture. And the reason for doing this, the whole idea is that we have, if you like, a single pure isolate, and we always go back to that pure isolate for all of our production cultures, and we go back to it without taking it through any further generations that actually takes it away from its habitat, or further away from its habitat of being, let's say, a fecal sample, and being used to the environment of the gut or the vaginal canal. So the way that we do this, if we take a single colony from that isolated plate, if you like, and we put it into 50 mils of what we call broth. And the broth is like a clear soup, and when the bacteria grow in this broth, it turns it into a sort of cloudy soup. So you go from a clear soup to a cloudy soup, and the cloudiness is the bacterial cells growing. So we add a single colony to 50 mils, and then once that 50 mils has grown up, we then put that 50 mils into 10 liters, and then once that has grown up, we then take the 10 liters, and it's 10 liters of this, I say, this kind of cloudy broth, and then we divide that into 2,000 5 mil aliquots, 5 mil little vials. So we have 2,000 vials, and we store them then in -80 to -180 conditions. And then when we're making a production batch, we always go back to one of those aliquots, and that's what we do here. So when we're making a production batch of your HMF probiotic, or each of the strains in the HMF probiotic, we start off with a 5 mil of this mother culture that's been stored at -80 to -180, and that goes into 5 liters of our clear broth again, and we get then a cloudy broth, and that 5 liters is then a stepwise build up. So that 5 liters goes into 500 liters, and the 500 liters then goes into 15,000 litres, and that's our, if you like, that's our production fermentation volume. And this is a critical point here, because what we then do is ferment that to a point where we know we've got the optimized yield, so it's grown up as far as it is able to, but the health of the cells are optimized for maximal preservation, or maximized preservation through the freeze drying process. And I'll come on to that now. So once we've hit that point, that critical point where we've got the highest yield, but we've also got the healthiest cells, then we go through what we call the downstream processing. So we take that sort of cloudy soup and we centrifuge it out, and the centrifuge then basically drops out all of the bacterial cells. And that 15,000 litres then turns into, if you like, a bacterial concentrate. And it looks like single cream. It looks that's the consistency and the appearance of it. And we get about 600 litres from that 15,000 litre fermentation batch. And then prior to freeze drying, a very important step is that we have to formulate this concentrated bacterial concentrate, if you like, or cream, with certain components that protects it during the freeze drying. If we didn't do that, if we simply put the naked bacterial cells into the freeze dryer, you get something like 99% death through the freeze drying process. Now, what we do is we add excipients or cryoprotectants that protects these bacterial cells through the freezing and the drying process. And these components are phosphates. There's also some amino acids we sometimes use, but the most important component that we add is certain sugars, particularly trehalose. And these protect the cells in a number of ways. So in the freezing process, they protect the cells by reducing ice crystal formation and ice crystal size. So you get less, if you like, piercing of the cell membranes and piercing of the cell walls. And also you get a lower level of osmotic pressure in the cells. And then a really interesting component that during the actual drying phase, and if you think about if a cell is being dried by whatever mechanism, whether it's being at some point, if it's being dried, then you're dragging water out of that cell. Now, if you think of protein chemistry, and what you know is that proteins are three-dimensional chemicals or molecules, and that what keeps them in that three-dimensional form is basically water. So you've got water bridges, if you like, that keep the structure, that keep the three-dimensional structure of that protein. And the three-dimensional structure is particularly important for enzymes because it's the three-dimensional structure that gives it its function. Once you take the water out within the drying process, then that three-dimensional structure collapses. And when you add water back, it doesn't reform. And so the enzyme becomes inactive, and that is what actually kills the cells during the freeze drying process. What happens when we add these particular sugars is that as the water is actually taken out of the cell, the sugars replace it, and they act as in the same way as a bridge, and they keep the three-dimensional structure of the enzyme intact, which is really neat. I mean, it's a really elegant process. As the water comes out, the sugars go in, and they almost act as kind of scaffolding in keeping the three-dimensional structure of the enzymes intact. When you actually, so when the cells come into contact with water again, so for instance, when you're taking your HMF capsule and it's coming into contact with moisture in the stomach and in the intestine, it becomes reactivated. What happens is that the water re-enters the cell and the sugars fall away, and the water replaces the sugars, and so the enzyme then still remains intact and still has its form and is still completely functional, and the sugars just, if you like, exit from the cell. So it's a remarkable process and incredibly effective. So at the end of that freeze drying process then, so to give you an idea of how effective that is, as I say, if you just dried these cells in a naked form, maybe 99% loss. Once you've got, if you add these cryoprotectant molecules, particularly the sugars, particularly trehalose, then you're at something like 75 to 100% survival. It's in that order. Bearing in mind that, you know, freezing and drying is a very stressful process, and freeze drying is the most gentle process of drying, but it's still very, very stressful. So, for instance, if I was to put any of you into a freeze dryer, you would die within minutes. Drying is a very difficult process. Nevertheless, at the end of that, we have a freeze-dried concentrate, which is very concentrated. So a freeze-dried concentrate of probiotic contains between 200 and 1,000 billion organisms per gram. And with that type of concentrate, then it is possible now to get, let's say, a capsule to have about 100 billion organisms in it. You're about at the absolute limit there. You'll never see a capsule that's got 200 billion, because it's simply too much to fit into a capsule. But 100 billion is just about doable in a single capsule. Okay. Given all of that preservation technique, and given that we can do that, and we've been able to do that for a long time, it still didn't take away from the fact that we had to keep probiotics at refrigerated temperatures, and this is the reason why. So even though we could dry them effectively and survival through the freeze drying process was high, we still had to keep them in a refrigerated mode, and this is why. This is a relationship in terms of temperature and survival, and this is with bacterial strains, Lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, where I said the water activity is above 0.25, and you'll see the relevance of that in a moment. So if it's above 0.25, this is the type of temperature relationship that you'll see with probiotics, and you'll see that 95% survival at 12 months at -20. That goes down to 80% survival at 12 months at 4 degrees C. But that is doable. If we've got 80% survival at 12 months, that's basically doable, and that's what we were working with up until, as I say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that was, you know, that was fine, because we can put overage in to make sure that you can reach your label claim at the end of, let's say, either 12 months or even 24 months. Pretty easy. Once you get down to 25 degrees C or up to 25 degrees C, you've only got 5% survival at 12 months, and that's in a nutshell, that was being the crux of where we were 10 years ago. At 25 degrees C, we only had 5% survival after 12 months. If you went up then to 30 degrees C, it was 5% survival at 4 months. And if you went 37 degrees C, then you had virtually complete loss at a 2-month period. And that was the situation until 5 years ago. And that is why all products were refrigerated that were viable. Okay, then over the last couple of years, or the last 10 years, increasingly we've become aware, particularly in the last 5, 6 years, become aware of the factors that influence probiotic stability. And there are 3, but the 2 that are the most important by far are a thing called water activity and temperature. The third one is oxygen, but the 2 most important are water activity and temperature. Water activity is maybe a term that you haven't heard, and it's not the same as water content. What it is, it's the amount of water that is available for microbial activity. And to give you an idea, if you take something like jam, for instance, jam will have a high level of moisture or of water, have a high water content, but the water activity is very low, and that's because the jam contains a lot of sugar, which binds the water effectively and makes it unavailable for microbial activity, and that's why jams don't spoil very easily. So water activity is a measure of the water availability for microbial activity. And this maybe explains it a little bit more here. So this is a graph that shows water activity, which is here, as opposed to water content. And the water activity of water, for instance, is 1. So water activity is always measured below 1. And so if you look at, let's say, your own tissues, if you look at vegetables, if you look at us, we're about 0.9. So our water activity is very, very high. And even once you get to these intermediate dried foods like jams, dried fruits, salami, and so forth, in these intermediate products, they have a water activity of around about 0.9 down to about 0.6. And you know that these are products that are relatively stable. They don't spoil very, very easily. But even they have a water activity between 0.6 and 0.9. And then you have the dehydrated food, so your true dried food. So dried foods, grains, things like milk powder, for instance, they will have a water activity of between 0.6 down to about a minimum of 0.2. And we consider them to be dry, and we consider that they will almost have an indefinite shelf life because they are almost completely dry, particularly if they're down at that 0.2 mark. Now, that would be fine, and for a long time, if we were measuring water activity in bacterial concentrates, we would think that 0.2, because everything else is stable, dried foods, grains, milk powder, everything's stable at that point, but not so for bacterial concentrates. What we find for bacterial concentrates to be stable, they have to have a water activity way below that. They have to have a water activity of, from an ideal point of view, between 0.05 and 0.1, but at the very most up to 0.2. But the ideal is between 0.05 and 0.15, let's say. And that's way below what is normally considered to be, if you like, the water activity necessary for a thing to be dry and to be stable. But for probiotic concentrates, they've got to be ultra dry. You wouldn't necessarily notice the difference between, in terms of the visibility of let's say a powder. It would still be a free-flowing powder that had a water activity of 0.3 and one that had 0.05. This would be the difference that you would see from a survival point of view. So if you have a water activity of between 0.05 and 0.1, then you've got something like 90% survival over up to 24 months. It's that. And then if you go down to a water activity of, or go up to a water activity between 0.1 and 0.2, then you've got something in the order of 50% survival at 24 months. These are all doable. Once you get down to a water activity of 0.2 to 0.3, then you're down at, let's say, 5% survival after 15 months. And this is the type of, and this is at 25 degrees C. Sorry, I should have mentioned this is at 25 degrees C. So this is a type of arrangement, or this is a type of scenario we had 6, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, where we didn't know how important water activity was. So we would typically see bacterial concentrates around this sort of level, and that's why we saw 5% survival at 15 months in ambient conditions. And then if you go to a water activity of over 0.3, then you're down at 5% after 6 months. So high temperatures and high water activity would be devastating to probiotic survival. But this was the really important thing. It was only 6, 7 years ago that we realized the difference that would make if you could take the water activity down to something like 0.05 rather than being 0.2. Once we realized that, then the whole stability thing changed, and as I say, it was a sea change. I think there's a poll now.
Yes, this will be our first poll. Okay, so what are the 2 most important factors which determine the stability of probiotics? Please select A, temperature and water activity, B, the genus and species, or C, the species and strain. Please make your selection. So we'll allow another 5 seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 final second to vote. So thank you for taking the time to take this poll. I'll now close the poll and share the results. So the correct answer is A, temperature and water activity. And this is fantastic. 93% of you selected the correct answer. So Dr. Plummer, can you comment on this briefly, please?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been talking about that, and I'm just pleased that what I've said has made sense and has been relatively clear. It is, those two are the most important parameters by far in terms of stability of probiotics. So
Wonderful, thank you.
And that's been key. So recognizing that, as I say, has been key to the development of shelf-stable varieties of probiotic products, which we'll come on to. Okay, let's so as part and parcel of that, our scientists here, we've developed some unique processes, understanding the importance of temperature and this water activity thing, to take our knowledge and our technology and the abilities of what we can do with probiotic products even further. And we've encompassed this, I suppose, in two different processes. One is called triphase and one is called stability max. And let me just move on to what these two processes are. So triphase, by its very name, is a triple phase process, and what it means is that effectively there are 3 dehydration stages when we're producing your HMF probiotics. So when you look at an HMF capsule, you take it out of the blister pack or you take it out of a pot, that's been through 3 dehydration stages during its manufacture. The first is the freeze drying stage that we were talking about in terms of the freeze drying of the fermentation concentrate. Then in the preparation of the finished product, of the capsule or the tablet or the stick pack, then it goes through 2 further dehydration stages. And what this basically results in is that the product will have a water activity of between 0.05 and 0.1. So it is at its, if you like, maximum stability, or it's at its maximum stability potential. And the other thing about doing the triphase process is that we not only take the probiotic down to that 0.05, but we can add other components. Remember I was saying earlier on, if you add other components to the probiotic, it destabilizes the probiotic. If we use the triphase process, we can add a full multivitamin to a probiotic. We can add botanicals to a probiotic, even a high potency probiotic, and it doesn't affect stability. And so triphase does 2 things. It takes the probiotic, even a high potency probiotic, down to very, very low water activity, but it also means that we can add other components to the probiotic without destabilizing it. So that's triphase. It's 3 stages of dehydration. Then we have a process that we call stability max, which is a combination of attributes. And stability max simply is this: that once you've got your, let's say, capsule or your tablet in the perfect state, stability max is just a packaging regime or process that keeps it in that perfect state as much as we can through the shelf life period. And there are 3 things that we have with regard to stability max that are the stability max components. One is that the packaging must be gas tight, and in this case, it doesn't mean that it's oxygen tight. It means that it is water vapor tight or water moisture vapor tight. So it won't allow any moisture to ingress into the product. The second one is the addition of what we call scavenging desiccants. So these are water scavenging desiccants that we put into the finished product to just, if you like, take out any moisture that might be in the headspace of the product. And then, even though we've got the low water activity with the product, there's still a level of die-off. Even with the most perfect process, there's still a level of die-off. So we always add what we call an overage at the time of manufacture to enable us to guarantee that at the end of the shelf life, we still maintain a label claim. So, for instance, it may be that, let's say you got HMF intensive, and its the label claim is 25 billion. Then we would add a significantly higher level of that to make sure that after 18 months at ambient temperatures, it's still at 25 billion. So if you actually analyzed it, you might be actually taking 32 billion or 33 billion or 35 billion. It's that kind of order of overage that we, even with this optimized triphase and stability max process, we still have to add that kind of level in to guarantee that you'll always reach label claim at the end of shelf life. Okay, and let's just I'm just going to move on to this. So you can see here the difference that this triphase and stability max process makes. So what I've got here is basically it's a comparison. And this is the sort of profile that we'll see with a high potency probiotic combined with a multivitamin component. So high potency probiotic combined with a multivitamin component, this would normally be a difficult product to keep stable, and this is what we can do. So with the triphase and stability max process, we can keep this product like this stable over a 24-month period at zone 2. Zone 2 is a climatic condition or environment, and it's basically Canada. So Canada, UK is in climatic condition zone 2. Zone 4 is more tropical, and so with zone 4 we can only go to 18 months and keep stability. So zone 4 is Southeast Asia, that kind of area. So you're looking at 30 degrees C ambient temperature and 75 relative humidity. Then if we were to compare that with, let's say, standard freeze drying without using triphase but with using stability max, then you'd only get 12 months. If it was just standard freeze drying with gas type packaging, and that's the only thing you would do, you go down to 6 months. And with a multivitamin and probiotic, if it was just standard freeze drying and non-optimized packaging, then 2 months stability is all you're going to get. And that was the typical situation 15 years ago. So you can see, if you take the bottom graph there, or histogram there, and you compare it to there, you can see how far we've come in terms of this technology over the past 15 years. That's another poll.
All right, so this is our second poll, everyone. So stability max is a process to prolong shelf life. Which 3 of the following procedures are used in stability max? Please select all that apply. A, overage of probiotic bacteria. B, refrigeration of the product. C, coating the bacteria with an impermeable film. D, gas-tight packaging. And E, including a desiccant to absorb moisture. So please select all that apply. So we'll allow another 5 seconds for you to vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll close the poll now and share the results. Thank you. Okay, so the answer, 3 answers actually. A, D, and E. So A, overage of probiotic bacteria, 77% of you selected that. Gas tight packaging, D, 88%, and E, including a desiccant to absorb moisture. So I think that's fantastic. The majority of you selected the 3 correct answers. Thank you.
Great, and that is also good. And those are critically important, and that's not only from the production of our probiotics, but any probiotic, if it's stored at ambient conditions, you should be looking out for those attributes, if you like. Gas type packaging. You probably won't be able to determine whether there is any overage there, but some kind of desiccant activity would also be very relevant. Okay, right, that's all about the processing and the technology. I think it has made such a difference, though, and I think it was worth going through that, and also just the whole process of strain selection and manufacture. You probably don't hear that or have that sort of information provided to you in most circumstances. So maybe it's been interesting for the last 20 minutes just to hear about that. Okay, let's move on and talk about probiotics from a health point of view. And I want to just approach this in a slightly different way in terms of what do probiotics do in a very general, holistic sort of sense, and what are we asking them to do, particularly in the context of them being effectively proxies for our microbiota or microbiome. Remember, what we define probiotics are and what we actually do when we're selecting and isolating and producing a probiotic strain, is that what we're doing is we're isolating what we believe to be the most beneficial strains from the microbiota. And then effectively what we're doing, as you've seen, is we isolate them, purify them, and then grow them up and basically put them into a capsule and then put them back into that person or into you or into the patient in higher numbers than are typically there already, to exert hopefully even greater benefits. So they're already exerting benefits. We basically isolate those ones which are exerting benefits, and we put them back into the individual in higher numbers to hopefully exert even greater benefits. And as such, probiotics are, as I say, they're simple proxies for our microbiota, but I think very effective proxies for our microbiota. Okay, so where do we need it, and in which circumstances would we need to have a proxy for our microbiota? Well, if we take that our indigenous microbiota, which we understand now, or a microbiome, whichever term you actually prefer to use, that it functions and it communicates with many parts of our physiology, and communicates in a way that is both functional and in most cases provides benefit. It provides functionality to that physiology, and in many cases provides benefit to that physiology. As such, if you upset that homeostasis and you upset the microbial balance, then the likelihood is that you're going to interfere with that crosstalk. So if you've got a conversation going on between, let's say, your microbiota and your immune system, and then you disturb that microbiota, you change it, let's say by the use of antibiotics, so you change the profile of your microbiota, you're likely to change that conversation. And that conversation then, because it's changed, may not exert the same benefits as it would have done ordinarily, and may even have adverse effects. And that's the whole kind of point of what we're actually looking at here, that what we call dysbiosis, if you like, so an unbalanced or altered microbiota will have a different type of communication to our physiologies, and that communication may be adverse and may produce some adverse outcomes. And so we then say, okay, if that's been the situation, or that is likely to be the situation, we want to try and prevent that or to resolve it with the use of probiotics, because as we've said, probiotics are proxies for our microbiota. So, and as such, probiotics have been shown to have the ability to do three things really, and to interact in three ways. So to prevent microbial imbalance from occurring in the first place. So for instance, reduction in the risk of antibiotic associated diarrhea. Where's my thing? So here you haven't by taking a probiotic alongside an antibiotic, for instance, or prior to and alongside an antibiotic, you're preventing that overgrowth or dysbiosis from occurring, and the symptomology of that is that you end up preventing antibiotic associated diarrhea. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you have prevented the antibiotic associated diarrhea from occurring, because you've prevented the dysbiosis from occurring and maintained, if you like, that hopefully that same communication and crosstalk with whatever physiology is being communicated with. Then the next one is where you're rectifying a state of microbial imbalance that has already occurred, and you're restoring that homeostasis. And an example of this, for instance, would be the use of probiotics for IBS or IBD. Let's say IBS. So IBS, we know now is that IBS risk and risk of developing IBS symptoms is strongly associated with more frequent antibiotic use. As you would imagine, antibiotic use, if it's reasonably frequent, you're going to have a higher level of dysbiosis. That will end up in many circumstances in developing symptoms of IBS. And so what we use probiotics for then is to try and restore homeostasis. And we see that, and we see the effects of that in terms of reduction in symptomology of IBS. And we see that time and time again. We'll come on to it in a moment. But that reduction in symptomology is because you've had a restoration of something like the original homeostasis that was there prior to the dysbiosis taking place. And then the third one is actually really interesting, which is the ability of a probiotic to create maybe a more beneficial homeostasis. And this we see, for instance, when we give probiotics to both children and adults over an extended period of time. And we see, for instance, that there is a significant reduction in upper respiratory tract infection in what we consider to be healthy kids and healthy adults. But what we see is an improvement in their health, in that they have a significantly lower risk of developing upper respiratory tract infections, both frequency and duration of those infections. So there, what we're doing is we are taking somebody or a population that we consider to be healthy, and effectively we're making them healthier. And that's, I think, a really exciting element of if you like, probiotic science as we move forward. And the other element of that is that we're seeing that when we give probiotics to endurance athletes, for instance, we see that their performance is enhanced. And again, what we're doing there, because athletes measure their health effectively by they sort of quantify it by their performance, we're effectively making them healthier, and that's being expressed. Even though they're healthy already, I mean, athlete you would consider to be healthy already, that's being expressed in an increased performance or a better performance. So three different things. Probiotics have the ability to prevent imbalance from occurring. They have the ability to rectify imbalance of the microbiota, and they have the ability potentially to create a better balance or a better homeostasis in already healthy individuals. That all of those three are exciting, but particularly the last one. Okay, let's look at some of the data that we have to support what I've just said. And we'll start off with, well, just, if you like, a summary. These are all of the, when Diane first introduced me, what she was saying is that we've published over 100 papers now, and within that 22 full published randomized controlled placebo-controlled human trials. And these are some of the results that we've got. These are all outcomes from published human clinical trials. So I'll just run through them quickly because I think it's both impressive and it shows, so is what I'm trying to put across here, that we've gone away from the point where probiotics were considered to be of benefit to intestinal health and immune health. We've gone away from that, and we see a much wider spectrum of benefits now. So, what we've shown in these human trials is improved immune function in adults with our 25 billion, and I'll come back to that. But this is with the HMF consortium at 25 billion. Improved athletic performance. We've seen reduction in antibiotic-associated diarrhea, both C. diff associated diarrhea and non-C. diff associated diarrhea. We've seen reduction in IBS symptoms, both in defined IBS sufferers and in athletes, endurance athletes, who suffer from something very, very similar to IBS and suffer very commonly from that. We've seen reduction in antibiotic resistance in the regrowth flora. We've seen reduction in intestinal permeability. Recently, we've done 2 very large trials, comparatively speaking, in looking at weight reduction using probiotics. We've seen reduction in small, dense LDL particles, which is the most dangerous form of cholesterol, if you like, in overweight and obese individuals as well. We've seen reduction in coughs and colds, both in children and in adults. And in children, I'll come on to it in a moment. That's 2 separate trials showing very, very similar outcomes, beneficial outcomes. We've shown reduction in constipation in babies. We've shown reduction in development of allergy and allergic sensitization in both babies and in older children. And we've shown reduction in anxiety in healthy adults and improvement in cognitive function. All of these and most of these with the same consortia or the same consortium of bacteria. So the HMF, the central HMF consortium of bacteria, has been used in 80% of these trials, and very often exactly the same concentration. So 25 billion, 25 billion, 25 billion, 25 billion, 25 billion, 25 billion here, 25 billion here, which I think is just impressive. Okay, right. And I'm not saying that that's what, let me just take that. I'm not saying that it's impressive from our point of view. I think it's impressive that this consortium can work so well. So I'm championing not me or my team. What I'm saying is that this is a very, very effective consortium of bacteria, and is now being increasingly recognized. I mean, my own thoughts is that HMF, the HMF consortium now has a wider range of benefits. I think we've now shown this has a wider range of benefits than any probiotic consortium globally, and I think that's an impressive stat, if you like. Let's look at probiotics and intestinal health. And probiotics have a function of maintaining the intestinal function, mucosal function within the gut, and also probiotics provide what we call non-immunological protection against infection. This is basically a barrier effect. When we give probiotics, particularly in the small intestine, what you see is that they attach to the intestinal wall. Most pathogens, if they're able to cause pathogenicity, then the only way that they can do that is they have to attach as a first stage, if you like. They have to attach to receptors, particularly on epithelial cells. If they don't attach to those because let's say the receptor is blocked because it's got a lactobacillus organism attached to the epithelial cell, then the pathogen can't attach to its receptor site, can't cause disease. And so there's a non-immunological protection against infection from these. And this is one of the attributes that we'll see here. So let's look. This is the first trial or the first outcome that I'd like you to look at. This is intestinal permeability here. We did a trial using triathletes. So these were triathletes that were entering into the Barcelona triathlon. And what they did prior to the race, 12 weeks prior to the race, they started to take probiotic. There was obviously a placebo group and there was a probiotic group. And what we measured was intestinal permeability, and we measured it at 3 different points. We measured it at baseline. We then measured it just before the race, so after 12 weeks of training for this triathlon, and then we measured it again 6 days after the race. So this is baseline, this is after 12 weeks of training just before the race, and this is 6 days prior to the race. This is the placebo group here. You can see that from baseline during the training period here, there was a significant increase in intestinal permeability, and there was a further significant increase in intestinal permeability 6 days after the race. And so what this shows us definitively is that the training itself caused trauma and intestinal permeability to increase, and the race itself caused increased trauma again, and for intestinal permeability to further increase. When we looked at the probiotic group here, this is baseline, and you can see that there's very little increase both during the training period and following the race. And both of these small increases here were non-significant. So you can see quite clearly the difference there, and probiotics are very protective against intestinal permeability. If we take another intestinal effect, so probiotics and IBS, I'm sure some of you have seen this slide before. It's one of our early trials, but I think it just demonstrates very, very clearly the impact that probiotics can have on something like IBS, which is very, very common. This is people who are diagnosed with IBS via the Rome 2 criterion. And what we did was we divided the group up into 2. One was placebo, and one was obviously taking what we now call in HMF IBS relief. And this is what we were measuring. We were measuring total IBS symptoms, and this is comprised of number of days of pain, severity of pain, bloating, satisfaction with bowel habit, and quality of life. These are all bundled into what we call total IBS symptoms, and this was the result here. And the first thing that you see is a very strong placebo effect, and this is common with IBS trials, irrespective of the intervention. And what it indicates is that there's a strong emotional and psychological component to IBS. You wouldn't see a placebo effect for malaria or for tuberculosis, for instance. But nevertheless, look at what happened in the probiotic group. So within 2 weeks, we're seeing divergence from the strong placebo effect. 4 weeks, there was a greater level of divergence. By 6 weeks, it was significant. By 8 weeks, there was a greater level of significance. So there are 2 sort of morals to this story here, 2 outcomes. First of all, that despite having a strong placebo effect, the probiotic showed a significant further reduction in symptoms beyond the placebo group. And the second point is that once you took the pressure of the probiotic away, the symptoms started to return. And that indicates that for many IBS sufferers, what they have to do is they need to take the probiotic for an extended, sometimes even an indefinite period. But what they will see is a significant improvement in their IBS symptomology, and that was shown here. It's still, I think, one of the clearest outcomes in IBS of any probiotic trial that's been done. This is another, this is, if you like, a similar, I mentioned earlier on that endurance athletes, particularly endurance runners, suffer from gut symptoms very, very similar to IBS. And they suffer it very, very commonly. It's between 60 and 70% of endurance runners have some element of gut symptomology, sometimes less severe, sometimes more severe. And this is again our Barcelona triathlon grouping that we showed for the intestinal permeability. And what we were measuring here was exactly the same type of symptomology as we did for IBS. So it's gut pain, number of days of pain, severity of pain, bloating. We're adding here as well nausea. And what you can see is that this is the severity of the gut symptomology during the 12-week training period in the placebo group, and this is the severity in the HMF group. P-value of less than 0.001, meaning that it's a very significant result and very consistent result as well across the group. Okay. This is a different trial that we've done with athletes. We've done quite a lot of work with athletes now, and again, we're just very interested in this this gut symptomology that particularly endurance runners have. Just as a matter of interest, the reason that we think that endurance runners, rather than, let's say, endurance cyclists, are more prone to this is simply is a sort of physical thing. It's a physical sort of stress and a physical trauma, simply because these endurance runners may be running 10 miles a day for 6 days a week or more, and that pounding has an impact, has a stressful impact on the gut. It disturbs the gut in a sort of physical way, and so potentially leads or contributes to this gut symptomology. Look at what we saw here. So this is a training period. This is for 4 weeks now. So these were athletes who were taking the probiotic, again 25 billion, and they were taking it 4 weeks before a marathon race, not a triathlon. They were taking it 4 weeks before a marathon race, and so you can see here. This is the symptomology across here, and it's divided into days 1 to 14 and days 15 to 28. So for the full month, if you like, prior to the race taking place. And what you can see here is this is the symptomology in the probiotic group in the first 14 days, and this is the symptomology in the placebo group in the first 14 days. It's pretty similar, and what it means is that the probiotic is taking a little bit of time to work, but look what happens when we're in the second 15 days. Look at the symptomology of the probiotic group here compared to the placebo group here. So this is markedly increased. This is markedly decreased, significantly so, and you can see it's very, very apparent. And the type of thing, I always think that a good example of this, if you remember Paula Radcliffe, and I think it was in one of the Olympics or the World Championships, she was running a marathon, and sort of halfway through she had to literally duck out and she had to go to the toilet. It was as simple as that, and there was nothing she could do about it. And that's the type of bowel discomfort and bowel symptomology that occurs very, very commonly. Interestingly, if we were to look at performance in these, and that this is another part, I'm not showing that slide here, what we see is that the probiotic group performed better in the marathon race than the non-probiotic group, partially because of the lower GI tract symptoms, but we think there's other factors at play as well, just for your information. Okay, probiotics and immune function. Now this is a slide here. So we've done intestinal effects. This is and we're going on to immune effects here. So a variety of things. And this is a slide that it looks like a pretty mundane slide, but what this slide, this is one of the best pieces of work I think that we've ever done. It was the biggest trial that we've ever done, and it reflects it not very well, I should add. And one of the things, so yeah, I'll amend this slide, but let me just tell you what this slide represents. We did a trial on babies, it was about, I suppose, 14 years ago now, we actually started the trial. This trial took us nearly 10 years to complete. Yeah, I'm sure some of you have heard me speak about it. We were looking at, we had 454 mother-baby pairs in this, and we were looking at the ability of the probiotic to prevent childhood allergy. And the first expression of childhood allergy is atopic eczema. We're not allowed to call it in this slide, but when we say skin sensitivity incidence here, what we're talking about is atopic eczema. Atopic eczema is defined as being an eczema type rash combined with a skin prick positive test for one or more of the major allergens. The major allergens we were looking at were milk, egg, house dust mite, grass pollen, cat dander, and fish. And so we did skin prick tests on all of these kids, 450 babies, skin prick tests on all of them, and then measured an eczema type rash associated with that, measured by the SCORAD scale. And this was all measurements done by a pediatric allergist. So the consultants who we were using is a pediatric allergist who was doing all of these measurements. But look at what we found. This is giving, so we gave HMF baby B to these babies for 6 months from birth. So from birth, 6 months, HMF baby B. Look at the results that we found. In the placebo group, by the time of 6 months, 8.8% of these babies were already diagnosed with atopic eczema. And in the probiotic group at 6 months, it was 2.7%. A remarkable difference. And then we then measured again at 2 years. Now, two years is a sort of is the benchmark. One of the reasons it's a benchmark is that if a baby is diagnosed with atopic eczema within 2 years, then it has a 60 to 70% chance of then going on to develop asthma. So a diagnosis of atopic eczema is the strongest risk factor for going on to develop the more serious disease, I would offer, of asthma. And look what we saw here. And bear in mind, this is 18 months after the last probiotic dose. So this indicates a permanent shift in the immune functionality. So what we were seeing here, by giving baby B for 6 months, at 2 years, 12.1% of the placebo group were diagnosed with atopic eczema, compared to in the probiotic group 5.3%, a 56% reduction in the risk of developing atopic eczema, or the risk of effectively developing allergy. Because as I say, atopic eczema is the first expression of allergy, and then the allergic person, the allergic sensitization goes on to express asthma, rhinitis, and so on and so forth. And in many cases, the eczema continues, not through childhood and sometimes into adulthood as well. It was a great trial and a great result. And what it shows you is the ability of a probiotic, particularly in that neonatal period, to shift, and in this case, permanently shift in a beneficial way how the immune function performs. This is a second way of looking at immune function, different one now. This is upper respiratory tract infection here. This is a trial that we did with HMF Fit for School, and I'll come on to that in a moment. In fact, I need to move and increase this, but this is HMF Fit for School. One of the best trials I think that we've done. And just to add, we've repeated this now. We've literally published in the last 2 weeks a repeat of this trial showing very, very similar results. That's very rare. It's very rare that you have a probiotic, that you have a dietary supplement where you have where you do a trial, you get a series of outcomes. You then do a trial with the same cohort, and then with the same intervention, the same period, and you get a very similar outcome. But we did on this. So what we see here is a 50% reduction. So what we did, we gave Fit for School over the winter period for 6 months daily to these kids. These are kids between 3 and 6 years of age, and they took Fit for School, as I say, daily for 6 months. What we found was saw a 50% reduction in total in duration of upper respiratory tract symptomology. We saw a 33% reduction in incidence. What that means is how many times in that 6 months did they see symptoms? Did they get symptoms? That was reduced by 33%. We saw a significant reduction in absenteeism from preschool. That was 30% reduction in absenteeism from school, We also saw a 40% reduction in visits to the doctor and a 45% reduction in antibiotic use. And we've seen this very, very similar data in this second trial. The other thing we did in the second trial was we looked at intestinal effects, and we saw the intestinal health of these kids, as well as the upper respiratory tract infection, was beneficially affected by the probiotic, by the Fit for School. A great trial. And then we've done the similar thing now, looking at upper respiratory tract symptoms in overweight and obese adults. And look what we saw here. So not only have we seen this in kids, this upper respiratory tract symptoms incidence. This is a trial in 220 obese and overweight adults. And look what we found, a 40% reduction in incidence of upper respiratory tract symptoms. This is in addition to the weight reduction. And we also looked at pain, both expressed as headaches and muscle pain, and we saw a 32% reduction in that. Again, just indicating that probiotics have multiple effects, multiple outcomes and beneficial outcomes to the consumer. Let's look at brain and mental health. This is, and obviously the gut and the microbiota in the gut can communicate to the brain in many different ways, either by the endocrine system, by the immune system, by the enteric neural system connecting to the central nervous system, and by metabolic activity in the gut produced by the microbiota that then is, if you like, is transported to the brain. This is just one of the trials that we've done. We did a trial looking at healthy adults, and we looked at a thing called trait anxiety, which is this kind of depressed, slightly depressed feeling that people get for a couple of days, where they feel vulnerable and anxious and threatened about everything, really. And then it disappears after a few days, and that period is called trait anxiety, as I say, where you feel a bit threatened, vulnerable, depressed and a bit blue about everything, and then it disappears. Your circumstances haven't changed, but your perception of them has. And that period where you are feeling threatened and vulnerable and anxious, that's called trait anxiety. And what we did in this trial, we took these healthy adults, again, placebo-controlled trial, those that were on the probiotic during the duration of the trial, their level of trait anxiety decreased, and the people in the placebo group, their level of trait anxiety increased. We also looked at cognitive function as expressed by continuity of attention, and we improved continuity of attention. So this is a trial that also showed a potential for probiotic to improve cognitive function. This is some interesting, really interesting work that we're doing on Alzheimer's disease, but it's very difficult. It's practically very difficult to do a trial on Alzheimer's disease in humans. So what we do in this case is we use a type of rodent. So it's a mouse model that develops Alzheimer's very, very quickly and quite severely. And what we've done here, we take these mice at 6 months of age, and we start to give them probiotics, and then we measure the effects of the probiotic after 3 and 6 months. And what we see, and we measure neuronal health. What we see is that the mice in the probiotic group, their neuronal health is improved both after 3 months and after 6 months. And that's expressed here. You can see that the expression from a visual point of view, the more red there is in this stain of the neuronal tissue, the more healthy the neuronal tissue is. And you can absolutely see the difference between the placebo and the probiotic group here. If this is expressed within humans, and there's no reason why this is a model that is there, because it does replicate human Alzheimer's, we would absolutely see protection of neuronal function within Alzheimer's disease sufferers. And this is lastly something that we're seeing very, very commonly now is when we're doing trials, we more and more we're setting up a part of the trial where we're looking at the outcome of what is called quality of life, and it's a questionnaire type thing. You can't measure it by a sort of blood or anything like that, but it's a questionnaire which is done in a systematic way, and so it is relevant. And of course, this is placebo-controlled trials that we're talking about here, so it's balanced in that way. And look what we found. This is one of the trials that we did, and we're measuring general wellness, state of health, state of energy, state of mood, and sleep quality. All of these considered to be sort of quality of life assessments. And look at the differences here. Obviously, the probiotic group is in green, and compared to the placebo group. And we're not just seeing this in one trial, we're almost seeing it in every single trial where we actually measure this. We're seeing it time and time again, and this again attests to that probiotics are having this whole body effect, because the probiotics communicate as properties of our microbiome, communicate with many parts, many parts of our physiology. Okay, let's talk about a few products here. And I started off, obviously, the whole seminar in terms of looking at production of shelf-stable products. These are the shelf-stable products that we have that are available at the moment. There's HMF Intensive, HMF Forte, HMF Immune, HMF IBS Relief, HMF Women's Daily, Multi-Strain, Baby Drops, Vaginal Health and Fitness. And there'll soon be 3 others as well. So they'll be Fit for School, HMF Hair and Scalp, and HMF Baby Immune. Let's just look at, let's just spend 10 minutes just going through some of these products here. HMF Intensive and HMF IBS Relief are the same product, but obviously Soroy was one of the I think probably the first company that actually got Health Canada approval to label a product IBS Relief on the basis of the trial that we just saw earlier on. Health Canada thought that the trial was significant enough, clear enough to enable that claim to be made. And HMF Intensive or IBS Relief is our, if you like, our gold standard product. It's the product we've done most of our trials on. It is our hero product without a doubt, and should be our go-to product for any therapeutic use, unless there is a reason to have one of the other products. But it should be our default product, I should say. It should be our default product because we've just got so much evidence for it. And unless there is a specific reason to use one of the other products, this is the product that should be used for intensive, for therapeutic use. We come to HMF Forte. This has been around a long time, and this is simply nothing more to say about this than this is a good maintenance product. So if you're not, if you've got a reasonably healthy person, and many of your practitioners that you probably think, well, actually, that's not what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with people who are sick, and so, but you will hopefully get them well, and once they are well, this is the sort of product that they should be. This is the product that they should be taking. It's also, it becomes more affordable. So HMF Intensive from a therapeutic point of view, HMF Forte from a maintenance point of view. HMF Immune. Again, this is a it's almost like a Fit for School tablet for adults. It's a blackcurrant flavored tablet. It's got our 25 billion HMF consortium, so it's basically HMF Intensive, plus it's got another strain which has been clinically shown to reduce upper respiratory tract infection. So it's got two stabs at the, or 2 bites at the cherry. It's got our HMF consortium that has been shown to reduce upper respiratory tract infection in adults, and it's got another strain called BL04, which is also shown to reduce upper respiratory tract infection as well. Also, we've got 100 milligrams of vitamin C and 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. I think probably 100 milligrams of vitamin C is not going to do very much. 1,000 IUs of vitamin D may actually have an impact in terms of upper respiratory tract infection as well. poll.
So this will be our final poll. So which of the following statements are true regarding the triphase process in relation to HMF probiotics? Please select all that apply. A, the triphase process allows adding multi-nutrients without losing shelf life. B, the process consists of 5 different steps. C, the first stage is the freeze drying of probiotic bacteria. So please select all that apply. And we'll allow another 5 seconds to for your vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We will close the poll now and share the results. Okay, so the answers are A and C. And 76% of you voted A and 81% voted C. So that's fantastic. I think you got it.
I think you've
Really
got
appreciate, yeah, really appreciate you participating in the polls this evening.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, well done, everyone. I think that's
thank you.
That's excellent. Okay, let's move on. So, Women's Daily. This is obviously a product. It contains a selection of strains which are particularly effective at colonizing the vaginal epithelium, and so it contains 6.3 billion of our core Genestra strains. We've been talking about the HMF strains, but it contains other strains which, as I say, have been found to be very good colonizers of the vaginal epithelial surface. How I would use this is for obviously women who have a genitourinary tract issue, so they've got a genitourinary tract health issue. It might be that they have recurrent candidiasis, for instance. It may be that they have a bit of cystitis. This would be the type of product that I would recommend for them. I'd probably recommend it as well as, particularly if they've got GI tract symptoms as well, and that often is the case. You might have a patient who has, if you like, a combination and co-presentation of something like IBS symptoms and genitourinary tract symptoms as well. What I would do is give this for the genitourinary tract symptoms, but I'd also, for a therapeutic period of a couple of months, give the HMF intensive as well as this product. HMF multi-strain. This is an interesting product here. There is a feeling out there, and it's a feeling that it's an opinion that I understand, and I understand the actual logic of it, and it is this: that the more strains that you have in a product, the more effective it's going to be. And the sort of rationale is that the microbiota contains many hundreds of strains, and so if a probiotic contains the more strains that a probiotic contains, it's going to be nearer to the variety that you get within the microbiota, and so is likely to be more effective. That's potentially true as long as the strains are effective. So what we've got here is a product that combines both of those philosophies, if you like. So what we've got here is 12.5 billion in each capsule of our core probiotic, our HMF consortium, and then we've got 2.5 billion of a variety of other strains. So we're basically combining the effectiveness of our core strains with a variety of other strains. On with that intention that the variety of strains does provide an additional benefit, and it may well do. We haven't done clinical trials specifically on this, but it may well have an effect. But what I'm comfortable with is that what you're providing here is enough of the core strains that you will have an effect. I would always give this as a product that I would take two a day, in which case what you're getting is HMF intensive plus. So that's how I would use this particular product. Shelf stable baby drops. This one is an easy one. Use this product if the mother either has a child previously who has had colic or believes that their child may develop colic. Colic is a distressing thing for a mother. I know that one of my children had colic, and it was distressing. It doesn't last very long. It was 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, but during that time it is a distressing element. And this probiotic has got a clinical trial that shows that there is some relief and reduction of symptomology of colic. So it's certainly something, if a mother has any indication that there might be a risk of the child developing colic, if they've had a previous child that has had colic, this is a product for them. This is suppository, and of course, I mean, this is the use of this is obvious, particularly alongside antibiotics, particularly if you have a female who is prone to develop candidiasis with antibiotic use, or prone to develop candidiasis as a result of the monthly cycle. There are some women who recurrently get candidiasis almost as part and parcel of their monthly cycle. This is a product that is ideal for those, but particularly alongside antibiotic use. There are 7 suppositories in this, and which is perfect, I feel like, alongside antibiotic use. Most antibiotics now are either between a 3 and 7 day course, and so this is perfectly suitable. And there are a lot of females. I mean, if you ask most females, they will say, okay, what are the downsides to antibiotic use? And they will typically say, yeah, well, it's the genitourinary tract issues of candidiasis. This is a product for them. Shelf stable, fit for school. As I said earlier on, I think this is a great product. This is a product that really works. 2 clinical trials now attest to that. Significant reduction, or significant improvement in health, significant reduction in upper respiratory tract infections, meaning significant reduction in duration of coughs and colds, incidence of coughs and colds, reduction in absenteeism from school, reduction in visits to the doctor, reduction in the use of antibiotics. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. All kids in Canada should be on this product during the winter. This is an interesting one. HMF hair and scalp. These are strains that are not our strains, that we haven't developed these. But the trials on this are impressive, and what these trials involved were people who had moderate to severe dandruff, and the probiotic group showed a significant reduction in dandruff and in itchiness and in greasiness of the hair. Now, what this is all down to is the fact that the probiotic is being taken orally. And what the probiotic is doing is reducing the level of inflammation on the skin, in this case at the scalp. And so if it's reducing the level of irritation and inflammation, then the person is scratching the scalp less. And it's the scratching that causes a lot of the dandruff to occur. It exacerbates dandruff. If there's less itching, it means there's less scratching, there's less dandruff, and there's less greasiness of the hair as well, which were the outcomes. It was less dandruff and less greasiness and less scratching and itching of the scalp on the probiotic group. So what is happening here? The probiotic taken orally, these strains reducing the level of inflammation on the scalp. And so the result of this ultimately is less irritation, less dandruff, and less greasiness of the hair. So if this I think would be a great product for anyone who unfortunately suffers from dandruff or an irritated scalp. Baby Immune, this is a product that was tested on babies, babies between 2 months and 8 months of age, and what this showed was that there was a reduction in upper respiratory tract infection in these babies. And so again, this is a probiotic which I would use. I'd probably use it alongside Baby B, HMF Baby B. I would probably use Baby B first of all if there's a preference, in that the indications of Baby B are lower levels of constipation, but more importantly, a potential to prevent allergy, and that is something that is so important and is a lifelong effect. It's probably more important than reduction in upper respiratory tract infections in the young baby. But nevertheless, there's no reason why you shouldn't give both. HMF Travel, that one's it's a simple one. Just use it to when you are traveling, and use more of it if you're going somewhere where you've got where the hygiene is likely to be lower. But it's self-explanatory really. Reduction of your risk of antibiotic associated diarrhea and just any type of GI tract upset. And shelf stable HMF Intensive 50, again, this is a delayed release capsule. What this means really is it's a 50 billion product. What it means is that you can take this if you want to on an empty stomach. And if you know what I've been saying for many years, is that you should take probiotics with food. You don't need to have an enteric coating, and an enteric coating takes a long time to dissolve, and so although it gets through the stomach, then the way that the time that it takes to dissolve for the contents to then become activated, you're probably halfway through the intestinal tract or small intestinal tract by the time that the thing becomes activated, maybe even all the way through. So a true enteric coating is not the way to go. But this is just a delayed release capsule format. The delay is pretty minor, but it will enable you to take this product on an empty stomach. Having said that, I would still always use a probiotic and just take it with food, because we know you get 100% transmission from the stomach into the small intestine, and that the probiotics are activated at the time of entering the small intestine. So, but for those people who, let's say, unwilling to take it with food, or are always going to forget to take it with food, this is a potential alternative. And I think we're probably, it's 9:39. So I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to just go on to this. This is something that the labels that HMF probiotics are carrying are going to change slightly, and what is being indicated here is that on the label now we're going to be indicating the cryoprotectants that we are using, as I mentioned earlier on, in terms of protecting the bacterial cultures through freeze drying. To give you an idea, probably some of you are thinking, well, how much sugar is actually used in the cryoprotectants? Well, if you're taking, let's say, an HMF capsule, then the equivalent amount of sugar that is in the HMF capsule is about the same as 1/3 of one blueberry. So it's basically tiny. And that is, I think, just about it. So summary, until 10 years ago, very little understanding of what affected stability in probiotic products. The only mechanism that we had really to maintain shelf life was to keep the product in a fridge. And if you always have products that were on the shelf 10 years ago, ambient conditions, very, very likely, in fact, almost certain, that by the time that you were using them, there was very little activity left in them. We now know that water activity and temperature are most important components in this, and that understanding has now meant that we can produce products with up to an 18-month, maybe even 24 months shelf life at room temperature. And we've also got our specific processes, triphase and stability max, to maximize that process even more. So this is just repeating the slide that we saw earlier on, and this is just a list of our consortia and the trials that we've done to support their use. So, and you can look at that. I'm sure you can get this slide presentation, and so I won't dwell on it. I'll finish now because we've already run over by 15 minutes nearly. So what I'd like to do is just thank you very much for attending tonight. I hope it's been interesting and enjoyable, and you've learned something. You certainly learned about stability, because the polls and what the impact of that, the polls have indicated that. So yes, I hope it's been enjoyable, a little bit different from a webinar point of view, but as I say, informative, hopefully, of another aspect of probiotic science. And suffice to say that I'm sure we'll be having another webinar fairly soon, and hope to see you again or hear you again. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. We'll open up for a few questions now. So the first question is from a participant who is wondering, what is the best probiotic for an adult respiratory tract?
For an adult upper respiratory tract infection, right? Okay. That result that we had was with our product HMF Metabolic, and you might think, well, that's a metabolic product, and it's used for weight reduction, and that was the primary outcome. That was all what we were looking at. We were looking at weight reduction in overweight and obese adults, and that's what we saw. We found consistent and significant reduction in weight, particularly in overweight people, and particularly in people over 45. But as I suppose the whole point of what we've been saying tonight is that probiotics have multiple benefits, and this was exactly what was shown in this trial. That not only did these individuals lose weight, but the upper respiratory tract data that we got was from these individuals, and the pain data, the headaches and the muscle pain, was from the same trial. These are outcomes that were measured. The quality of life data that we showed was from the same trial. We've also now published, we've drilled down further into the upper respiratory tract infection data, and we've shown, and we've just published this. And if the participant wants to get hold of that paper, then Diane, I can send that to you, and you can send it to that person. But what this paper has shown is that that the effect on upper respiratory tract infection and the benefits in terms of reduction in upper respiratory tract infection is evident after the first 2 weeks. So you don't have to take the product for 6 months for this effect to start working. It starts working within 2 weeks of actually taking the product. So the answer to the question is is probably an unexpected answer, but the answer to the question is HMF Metabolic, because I think that we should almost rename that product as being the ultimate probiotic in many ways, because it seems to have so many benefits, but we know that it has benefits in terms of upper respiratory tract infection. And the other thing that we indicated in this new publication was that it is likely to have benefits in terms of reduction in infection levels and potentially in severity of disease of COVID-19 as well, which is pretty amazing. So
thank you, Dr. Plummer.
HMF metabolic.
Thank you. A question from Teresa. She's wondering if the organisms in HMF intensive, for example, have a potential to decrease an excess of archaea, which is sort of the methano.
Yes,
bacteria.
almost the most, or what are considered to be almost the more primitive type of bacteria. I don't think there's a huge amount of evidence for that. Let me explain a little bit about why I'm saying that. And again, maybe goes back to some of the seminars that I've done and people have attended. Most of the probiotic activity that we're looking at is focused on the small intestine, and because strange, I mean, if we go, just briefly bear with me on this. The small intestine is 20 feet long. It's basically a bigger organ than the large intestine. It contains a very low number, relatively speaking, of bacterial community. It contains its own kind of small intestinal microbiome. It's dominated by the lactobacilli and other types, which we call facultative types, in the upper part of the small intestine. When you get to the ileum, the lower part of the small intestine, the bifidobacteria become the dominant form. When we're taking a probiotic, the reason that probiotics can have an effect when we're giving 25 billion is because that level almost swamps the indigenous level of bacteria in the small intestine, but it's a tiny amount compared to the massive amount of bacteria in the large intestine. If you want to have an impact on the large intestinal microbiota, then you have to use massive numbers of probiotic bacteria. So where we would use 500 billion or 1,000 billion or maybe 2,000 billion to have some impact on the large intestinal microbiota. Now, the archaea, they typically exist in the large intestine, not in the small intestine. And so the expectation of impacts of HMF intensive, for instance, on archaea populations and activity would be relatively small. But we've never measured it, but that would be my appreciation of it, because we're effectively targeting the small intestine, because that's where most of the immune system of the gut is, that's where most of the enteric neural system is, that's where most of the endocrine system. When we're talking about crosstalk and communication with the physiology of our body, most of that communication is through the small intestine, because that's where most of that physiology kind of communicates into, is the small intestine. So for that reason, I don't think it would have a major impact on archaea population. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. Now, a question from Salwa. She's wondering, after a course of antibiotics, let's say for 14 days, for addressing something like H. pylori, what probiotic would you recommend and for how long? And would that patient have to continue taking probiotics even after the elimination of that specific bacteria?
Okay, good question.
So 14 days, yeah, 14 days of antibiotics. What would you recommend and for how long?
First of all, she should be, or he should be, or the person should be taking the probiotics alongside the antibiotics. So at the same So don't wait until the antibiotic course is actually finished. Absolutely don't do that. Take the probiotic alongside at the same time as the course of antibiotics. Not at the same time. There has to be at least 2 hours difference between when you're taking the antibiotic for the Helicobacter and you're taking the probiotic. But it should be taken alongside that. I would, in this case, in a situation like this, I would give HMF antibiotic care, the 100 billion. And although we've done our work at 25 billion, I think that for the short course of an antibiotic, it looks like that this is a person who's the only issue that they have maybe is Helicobacter, and they're just trying to eradicate that. The antibiotic, particularly if it's the triple therapy with the proton pump inhibitor, that's very effective at getting rid of Helicobacter. But there's a lot of evidence out there that taking a probiotic alongside triple therapy is even better eradication. I think the figures are something like 80 to 85% eradication with triple therapy, and 95% eradication if you're using a probiotic alongside triple therapy. So I would use the antibiotic care. I would use that for that 14-day period, and then I would go on to HMF intensive for a month. And I think that would be, and then whatever, then it depends on what other situation that particular person is in. If it's just Helicobacter, then that 14-day antibiotic care, HMF intensive for a month, then that should be fine. And then that they'll go back to their regime of whatever they're doing on a daily basis.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. What is the what probiotic would you recommend for someone considering conception for use during pregnancy?
Oh, I mean, without
preparation.
HMF maternity, that's the product that we used in our baby trial. What I didn't say was that in our big baby trial that we did looking at allergy, we gave the probiotic to the babies for 6 months, but we gave the same probiotic to the mother in the last trimester of pregnancy. So we know that probiotic is both safe and very likely to be effective as well. So that would be the one that I would use without a shadow of doubt. And there's no reason to leave it until the 3rd trimester. Probiotic, that's the probiotic that should be taken from the first part of pregnancy. In terms of conception, there isn't really a huge amount of if the question is somebody who's trying to conceive and maybe finding it difficult to conceive. Unfortunately, I don't think there's very much data in terms of whether probiotics will improve fertility or conception rate, but certainly in terms of female health and genitourinary tract health during pregnancy, then a probiotic should be taken as soon as the person knows that they are pregnant. Or if they're taking a probiotic anyway, then there's no reason to stop taking a probiotic during pregnancy if they're already taking one.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. And a question from a participant. They're wondering if oregano oil, things like garlic, berberine, have an effect on the friendly bacteria.
Good question. Yes, and they do. The exception there being garlic. So if you're looking at things like berberine, oregano oil, these will have a negative impact on the bacteria. They have a broad spectrum antimicrobial effect, and that would include the probiotic bacteria. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, it's almost like then taking an antibiotic, but a natural antibiotic. It's still beneficial, even though you know that there is going to be a detrimental effect. It's still beneficial if you're looking at an antimicrobial effect to take the probiotic alongside the natural antibiotic, whether it's oregano or berberine. So if you like, treat them as in the same way as you would treat an antibiotic. You take a probiotic alongside it. The interesting one is garlic and allicin and the sulfur-containing compounds that the allium group of plants contain. We've actually done an awful lot of work on this, and we were the first people, we were the first research group, to discover that the allicin from garlic not only has a fantastically wide antimicrobial profile, not against only bacteria, but against fungi, particularly Candida albicans, but also viruses and protozoa like Giardia and Trichoderma. But aside from all that, it has very limited activity against the lactic acid bacteria as a group. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. It's almost so strange enough. They're compatible. And many years ago, I even used, in terms of fermentation, I used garlic as an ingredient in the fermentation media because it made the lactobacilli grow better. Long question or long answer short. For berberine, oregano, and other essential oils, well, berberine is an essential oil, but other essential oils, then use probiotics alongside these. Treat them as you would treat an antibiotic. Garlic is something that is exceptional in that you can use it alongside the probiotic and it actually won't have any impact on the probiotic. So if you're looking for the best antimicrobial to use and you think, well, garlic or oregano or the other one that's mentioned, berberine, if you think that they're going to be equally effective, then use garlic because the garlic won't have any impact on the probiotic at all. In fact, it will make it will enhance the probiotic effectiveness. So, yeah, good question.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. And the final question, a participant is wondering if they should leave the desiccant in the product after opening.
Yes. Very short answer to that, yes. And because it will still keep on, it will still function, and it will function to the point where it becomes completely saturated. It won't, but the desiccants that we use, they won't release moisture. It's an irreversible process, so they absorb moisture until they're saturated, but they won't release the moisture again. And so when the person's opening and closing the pot, for instance, then they'll be introducing a little bit of moisture into the head space as they open, but the desiccant will actually mop that up within minutes of them closing the pot down again. So the answer to that is yes. Keep it in.
Thank you, Dr. Plummer. This was an excellent and very informative webinar. Thank you. And thank you, Roxana, for hosting the webinar. Many thanks to you all for your attendance and your participation this evening. Our HMS research-driven, clinically proven probiotics are formulations you can trust and you can count on to benefit your health and the health of every patient in phenomenal ways. Our shelf-stable formulations provide great convenience for many people who find refrigeration a challenge. Please note that a recording of this webinar would be available on the Soroil website under Education Complimentary Recordings beginning next Wednesday until December 10th. So everyone registered will receive an email with instructions next week. And the formulations, the HMF Fit for School shelf-stable HMF Hair and Scalp, and HMF Baby Immune. Please be on the lookout for them. They will be launched between now and the new year. Please remember to take advantage of the promo codes in Canada. HMF Web 2021 provides 10% discount on the shelf-stable versions of HMF Intensive, HMF Shelf-Stable, IBS Relief, Forte, Immune, and HMF Women's Daily, as well as multi-strain. So the shelf-stable versions of those formulations, as well as HMF Vaginal Health and HMF Baby Drops. In the US, HMF Web 2021U provides 10% discount on the shelf-stable versions of HMF Intensive, HMF Forte, HMF Immune, and HMF Women's Daily, and HMF Multi-Strain. So just to reiterate the shelf-stable versions of those formulations, and the promo code can be used once before December 10th and qualify for free shipping. If you have any additional questions or you would like to open an account, please contact our Atrium Innovations representatives at 1-800-263-5861 in Canada, 1-888-737-6925 in the US. And also our medical advisors are available to support you with difficult cases from Monday until Thursday. And I do recognize that not all of your questions were answered, so please feel free to contact your representative or our medical advisor. So thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Dr. Plummer, we thank you very much. We appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge. Thank you. Good night, everyone.